If you felt just a little bit off today, like there was an underlying thread of unsettled present, what I'm about to share will probably really resonate with you, so stick with me. I want to tell you a story of what unfolded today that I think you will see yourself inside. And then I want to tell you exactly what I did to discern what I was feeling, as well as exactly what I did to move through it. And if you're new here, I'm Katya. I've spent thousands of hours observing subtle patterns in how people move through change and translating them into language that helps people navigate them more clearly. And that's exactly what this story is about. I noticed something interesting today. Late last night, I finally finished something that's been living solely inside me for quite a while. I was writing a chapter for a co-authored book, and yesterday I felt a really strong pull to just get it finished. It didn't have to be perfect, just complete enough that I could have it leave my computer and move into its next home. There was still a lot of details left. I still had a short bio to write. I had to submit a photo, and there was edits I knew I was going to come back to, but the important part had happened. The chapter no longer belonged solely to me. It had begun its journey into the world. And I realized it felt a lot like sitting on an airplane that has reached the end of the boarding process. All the passengers are seated, the luggage is loaded, the destination has been chosen, but the flight attendants are still walking down the aisles, the pilot is still making final checks, and while you're no longer preparing for the trip, you haven't actually left the ground either. And that's exactly how today felt to me. I only slept about 5 hours last night because I stayed up till almost dawn finishing this chapter. So my body was a little rough around the edges. That part made perfect sense. But as the day unfolded, something else was lingering. My body actually felt quite good, and my mind was clear. And yet there was this subtle wobble. It wasn't anxiety, and it wasn't even self-doubt exactly, just a slight feeling of being unsettled. At first, I assumed it was because I'd hardly slept. But when I slowed down at any point for just a moment, I noticed where my mind went. It kept wanting to revisit the chapter. Not because it thought that it wasn't any good. I actually quite liked where it ended up. But because I wanted to make sure every word was true. Was it the right word? Did this sentence actually convey what I meant? Was I accidentally leaving the reader with an impression that wasn't completely true? Anybody who's worked with me knows I am unusually particular about words. I'm meticulous, like to the point of being almost painful, but in a good way. I realize it's because I can literally feel the way words carry much more than just their standard dictionary definitions. They don't just communicate information, they carry experience. And they create it. Every sentence creates an image inside whomever is reading it or receiving it. And every paragraph shapes perception. So even the words we speak silently to ourselves throughout the day create this internal world that we eventually begin living inside. So I care about getting them right, not because I'm trying to sound eloquent. It's actually very much the opposite. I'm usually trying to remove eloquence whenever it starts to get in the way of truth. And so I sat with this all day today, and then something became very clear. Yesterday wasn't really about finishing the chapter. Yesterday was about completing something that would become external, where today was about allowing it to now begin living inside me in a different way. And those are completely different phases and experiences. And I think many of us underestimate what happens after we create something, or after we make a decision, or we cross an important threshold. We imagine that once it's done, we'll feel an immense shift and be completely confident, or completely certain, or feel grounded, massive relief, or feel like we want to celebrate. And sometimes we do. But sometimes there is this subtle in-between period It's like putting on a new pair of shoes that fit right, but you haven't broken them in yet. They're not the wrong shoes. They simply haven't integrated themselves into the way you move yet. They still feel a bit odd. And there's this in-between period at times like this where the body is still integrating a shift in identity that the mind has already arrived at. And until that synchronization, that relinking between those two completes, even the right path can feel slightly bumpy under your feet. Also, if this is the kind of conversation you have been looking for, feel free to subscribe. I would love to have you here to explore these patterns with me. So that's what today felt like to me. It wasn't questioning who I'd become. It was that my body was still letting everything settle into it. And I wondered if some of you have been noticing something similar. Maybe you've made a decision recently that you know is right, or you've completed something important, or maybe you've outgrown a way of living. And maybe conceptually it feels true, and maybe even emotionally you feel quite confident in it, and yet there is still this slight wobble. Your nervous system hasn't completely familiarized itself with the whole landscape of this newer version of you. So that wobble doesn't necessarily mean you need to be concerned. Sometimes that's simply what it feels like when an old identity has already loosened and the new one is still settling into place. And I also discovered something else. Some of those thoughts that I was having today were asking me to go back into the chapter, but they were actually wise. They helped me notice a few things that didn't belong there. They were true, but they belonged somewhere else. They belonged in my own book or in future conversations. And I was using the writing experiment as a way to explore them more deeply for myself. So those thoughts helped me create something cleaner. But the other thoughts, they were simply asking me to shrink, to blur what had already become clear and make myself a little smaller, a little more familiar. They weren't inviting greater truth. They were inviting more comfort. And that's a really important distinction because not every uncomfortable thought deserves to be believed, but not every uncomfortable thought should be ignored either. Some are inviting us towards greater accuracy and precision, where others are simply asking us to return to an older version of ourselves. Discernment is learning the difference. So if you've been feeling a little unsettled lately, before assuming that you're sliding backwards or sideways in any way, I'll invite you to consider another possibility. Maybe you're simply learning how to stand inside a newer expression of yourself. Maybe your mind understands it, but your body is still connecting to it. Maybe it isn't instability at all, and it's just integration. If that's where you find yourself today, take a breath. That is exactly what I did. I stood up. I allowed my spine to rise. I stood upwards and breathed deep, rooting myself down into the earth beneath me. So stand up and stand straight. Breathe deep, and then let that breath out fully and slowly. And recognize how far you've already come. Allow yourself to appreciate what has already been completed. And give your nervous system and your entire body space to let it all in. It's not about being perfect. It's just about being real. You don't have to become the next version of yourself overnight. Sometimes all that's required is allowing yourself to gently inhabit the person you've already become. And if that's where you find yourself today, I want you to know that that's a good place to be. Just let that wobble do exactly what it's meant to do. No need to force it. No need to resist anything. In fact, the opposite is true. Soften into it. Open up to it and just allow it to expand into you. So the integration of what's happened in the mind can drop fully down into the body in its own time. That's how to move through periods, through integrations like this, gently, easily, and wide open. Breathe deeply today, my friends. I'm Katya, and I will see you in the next one.